All right, Jonathan, let's talk about tech history. We have a co-host today, a guest host, I should say. Sam, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Go ahead, kick it off, Jonathan.
All right, September 13th, Osborne declares bankruptcy.
Is there a reason why Osborne should have declared bankruptcy, Sam?
Well, let's look at that. The Osborne, that's a laptop.
It's hardly a laptop. You cannot work on your lap with this big old box.
It's similar to the the laptop I was telling you, the compact that was 30 pounds. It's actually a little bit smaller, and I noticed this one has a built-in keyboard.
Yes.
And
you mean your portable compact did not have a built-in keyboard?
no, that would have just added to the weight of it. I see it has.
How do you create a portable computer without a keyboard?
I'm trying to remember. I don't think it had a keyboard. No, you had to. No, you had to plug it in. It had the serial ports for the keyboard.
So not only did you have two power plugs, you had one for the
monitor. One for the monitor and one for the rest of the system.
And then you
also had to plug in a keyboard.
You had to carry your own keyboard.
In a backpack, maybe. I mean,
that's hardly a laptop.
Not to mention it had a handle that you could carry, and I think I mentioned that you couldn't pick it up by that handle because the handle would snap off. It was so heavy.
Oh man, that's hilarious.
Are those two 5 1/4 floppies on it?
That's two 5 1/4 floppies, and that would be what, a 3-inch monitor?
Yeah, my cell phone screen is bigger than that. Wow. And there's some knobs on it. Is that a volume knob?
I think so.
Yeah.
There's something.
I can't see why they went out of business. I mean, for the that was 1983, right? It doesn't look that bad.
You have the printer port. You have your serial ports. I can't see what other types of ports you would have on there. So you have the ribbon. Part. You have the ribbon for the keyboard.
Wow.
Imagine having those computers today, though.
Yeah, they'd be worth a lot of money. Like, these are antiques now.
I mean, this would need to run DOS right off of the 5 1/4 if you can find 5 1/4 inch discs today.
Oh, it says that they went out of business due to competitive pressure and mismanagement. I would have to say it's probably more mismanagement because, if you can build something like this and get people to buy it, you can slowly improve upon it over time.
Jonathan, do you remember the price of this machine? We looked at it once.
Yeah, I don't remember.
I think the price was around $5,000.
Oh. Look at that, 24.5 pounds. That was lighter than what I had.
that was a decade earlier, huh?
Oh.
Powered from a wall socket.
Yeah, $5,000. You're right.
$5,000. That's what it's worth today, right?
Yeah, in today's money.
In today's money. Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
You know what I was looking at recently?
An
old commercials for Wang Computer.
Yes, I remember Wang System 30. That's what I learned on.
And they were competing against IBM, and they looked like they were doing good, and then one day they just went belly up. I wonder if they also had mismanagement, because how can you go wrong in the tech sector? I mean, especially at the time.
Well, I tell you, what happened was Wang System 30 was a word processing system that allowed you to have terminals on a shared computer. So you were basically you had a terminal and that was it. All the processing was happening on the mainframe itself. As personal computers came on board, there was no need to have the mainframe. You needed a server to store your files and share printers, but you no longer needed a dedicated time shared processor. And so that's where Novell came in. Novell came in and they came up with a really good file system. And I don't remember exactly what Novell was based off of. I want to say that Novell had roots in like BSD or Unix or something like that. But it was an operating system of its own. And so it was a lot cheaper to set up a PC with Novell OS to share files and share printers than to lease this big, refrigerator sized machine from Wang and pay an extraordinary amount of money and maintenance costs on top of that, and the power that it would take up. PCs were beginning to really take that compact form and be more affordable, to the point that the end user can take a PC and turn it into some kind of file server. So that's my guess. They didn't know how to swing with the times. They didn't know how to be flexible and change and realize that the Wang System 30 needed to change. They still wanted to sell these big refrigerators that would do time sharing processing on terminals.
It's interesting. IBM still has companies running off of these mainframes. Kaiser Permanente was one of them.
Oh, but I mean, have you seen their ZOS? Have you heard about that?
No.
ZOS is one of the top-notch operating systems out there. It is guaranteed. So ZOS, you can't just run ZOS. ZOS is a mix of hardware and software. And even if you were to have a huge electrical catastrophe, there is enough redundancy within the hardware of ZOS to safely store your data onto the hard drives before you lose any data.
Wow.
Their operating system, their file system, their Z file system, you can find it in open source NAS operating systems like FreeNAS or NAS for free. They actually run the Z file system, which basically it's a protected file system from any type of bit loss. And so, there's a possibility that shifting from one version of an operating to another may shift bits in your files and distorts your images and stuff like that. So ZOS actually protects from that. So not the ZOS, but the Z file system. So ZOS is like a whole collection of technology that guarantees redundancy, guarantees security, guarantees. It's just, you're buying like the whole thing. You're just not buying. It's kind of like going into the Apple ecosystem, right? Your Mac works with your iPhone works with your iPad works with your iPod. It's like this whole ecosystem. And so when you buy ZOS from IBM, you're buying into a whole ecosystem of server technology that guarantees security and redundancy, prevents loss of data. It's like a whole Fort Knox on your facility.
I remember one day I was leading a group of .NET developers at Kaiser, and we had a meeting with the leaders from the mainframe developers because we had to access some DB2 data, and we didn't know how to even get into the mainframe because it's one of those you have to know all the keystrokes.
Yeah.
And so we were in the meeting and they're like, well, you can hit this keystroke and you can send an email to someone. I'm like, you can send an email from the mainframe, and they got so insulted. They're like, hey, yeah, this isn't the Stone Age. You can send, of course you can send an email from the mainframe. Let me ask you a question. In .NET, if you were to pull every health record of every patient in Kaiser Permanente, how long would it take just to get a count? I was like, oh, maybe 10 hours, maybe, depending on what kind of computer you had. And he went ahead and did it in the mainframe. 2 seconds later, he had this large number and said, done. And I was like,
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. IBM has, I mean, they're high end. They're definitely not anything for home. It's high end. And if you want to protect data, I mean, as in securing it, making sure nobody can take your hard drive and read the data, the encryption behind it is they use hardware encryption. They don't use software encryption. So you need two pieces of hardware, not just the drive itself. You need another piece in order to decrypt the data on the hard drives. So if somebody steals a hard drive, which is already impossible because the room is going to be completely secured also, but being able to make sure that your data doesn't get lost. So the redundancy behind it, you know, it's like, you've heard of RAID disk drive, right? An array of disk drives. Well, they have a redundancy array of disk drives. So not only do they use array of disk drives for speed, but they'll have like a rack of hard drives that all work, you know, to save the data. And then there'll be a second rack right next to it where the data is just constantly being replicated. And then once that data gets replicated, it then gets transferred off-site, so that if there's some kind of disaster where that data is at, then, you know, you have an off-site recovery center that you can switch to.
interesting.
Yeah, no, they have a whole system that is, I mean, it's pretty cool. That's sure. It's amazing that we got into that whole topic from this little Osborne laptop. You know? Jonathan, we made a report on Kaiser, since we're on the Kaiser topic. Remember in grade school where you had to go take a newspaper clipping and create a report? And we made a report on Kaiser, the medical system, their computer system.
I don't remember that.
You don't?
No.
We were living in Roland Heights.
Oh, okay.
Well, what year was that?
Oh man, what you were? I think you were 7th, maybe 8th grade. What year was that? 2003, 2004.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
So apparently,
I was just gonna say, because I started working at Kaiser at 2005, and I left in 2007 to join
the other company,
White Bank. They gave me a sign-in bonus.
So yeah, that report that you wrote, Jonathan, was based on the number of errors that the system would make. And even though their error rate was, I think it was 3% error rate, it equated to like 500,000 patients a day that were having some kind of mistake made on their treatment, whether it be assigning a combination of medicines, you know, maybe a procedure, whatever the case was, but it was less than 3%. And that percentage, even though it represented a higher rate in patients, the percentage was lower because when you have a manual medical system where a human is making a decision, the error rate was as high as 20%.
Wow.
You remember, and that's what I remember that from that article that you wrote. It was from a newspaper article. The Kaiser record management system for the patients originally started, and it was supposed to be done in 16 months, and it took 5 years to actually complete, to get it into a usable state. And it was $15 million over budget. So 5 years late and 15 million over budget. Did you get any of that money, Sam?
No, but I can be 4 years late and 10 million over budget.
You would have done better, huh?
That's right.
All right. I don't know how we swung that Osborne declares bankruptcy to Jonathan's grade school report. So let's move on to the next one.
All right. I'm going to lump these three together since they all have to do with Apple.
Oh, we got 3 of them?
On the 15th and 16th was the last Apple II. And Steve Jobs resigning from Apple and renaming somebody as the CEO.
Interim CEO.
I remember that.
This is a guy that came from Sony, right?
Yeah.
That pushed him out.
Yeah, I remember he resigned under pressure.
From the Sony CEO, or the guy that came from Sony.
I remember the Apple II. Wow.
Wow, you're reminiscing there, Sam.
I remember they had this in our school when I was 6, actually. I remember being brought to a computer lab so we could do math problems on the computer. And the computers were these Apple IIes. It was just a black and white screen. And you would, the teacher would set up the computer for you, then you'd be like 7 + 8. You type in 15 and hit enter. And once you got to the end, you got like a little nice black and white animation. But I can't imagine, because the computer lab that had all the Apple IIes, it was pretty huge. And Apple IIes weren't that cheap back then. In fact, I had asked my mother to buy me one for my, Christmas. Once I found out Santa wasn't real, I'm like, oh, please buy me a computer when I turn 6, or 6 or 5. I forget what age I was. And because Apple IIes back then cost like, I don't know, $1,000, $2,000.
Yep.
And my mother was collecting welfare checks. She got me Timex Sinclair 1000 from Kmart. And I remember looking at it like, what the heck is this? This is not a computer. It doesn't have a color screen. It doesn't have the Apple on it. It doesn't have a disk drive. It's just, oh man.
Were you heartbroken, Sam?
I actually tried to get it to work. There was a tape player, and to load the programs, you had to know a little bit of the programming language. But it came with a book that spelled out everything for you, and I actually got some of the games to load. I just couldn't play with it because it took like half an hour just to set up a game.
Oh,
like,
yeah. Did you have to program it every time?
You had to put in these different commands, and then you had to turn on the tape player at the right time. On top of that, you had to hook everything to your TV, which was your monitor. And once you got everything hooked up, and the tape player and the cassette tape in and everything, you had to rewind the tape and then start playing it after you entered a certain command. Dude.
So is this where you got all your patience from, Sam?
I guess so. Because other kids were playing with their Ataris, where you just put in a cartridge, flip the system on, and you're good to go.
You're good to go.
Here I am with a cassette player, a little keyboard thing, and like they tried to put 5 symbols on one key.
Yeah.
Like it was mini compact and
Well, the typewriters try to put 5 symbols on one key. You can type a lowercase L and it also substitute it as a 1, or you can type a 0 or it's substituted as a capital O. Remember that?
Yeah.
So that goes back to the Stone Age. Yeah, I remember working on these. We would go down to before they became the FedEx store, they were known as
Kinko's?
Kinko's, yes.
Oh, wow.
FedEx Kinko's?
FedEx Kinko's. So Kinko's, before they got bought out by FedEx, they had a bunch of these machines on there. You would rent it by the hour. And what we would do is we would create them. We would use them to create house party flyers, because they had this program called Stylus, and it just had all these fancy fonts where you can create your flyers and stuff, and you can like twist the words, or arch the words, and you could put graphics on there, images and stuff like that. And so we would use it to create house party flyers, and then we would go and pass out these house party flyers. And it wasn't cheap.
Nice.
It wasn't cheap. I mean, you paid, I think it was like $4 an hour. So you have to have it in your mind what it was that you wanted to do. And if you got stuck, there was like 3 guys. We're all trying to figure it out, because we had like 1 hour. We have $4 and 1 hour to get this flyer done, and then printing them out. I think it was like half a cent a page. So what we would do is we would copy it and have the the mirror image like on the bottom part of the page, so that every page would print out 2 copies. So you can print out like 3 copies per cent or 4 copies a cent. I forget exactly what it was. And we would print out like 1,000 copies, right? So it cost us like $30 or something to get all these copies. And so, yeah, $34. And we had a whole stack of flyers and promoting a house party. And then we would charge at the door $3-4 to get into the house party. And then once we got all the money, we would call the cops on the party and say, hey, there's no better way to end the party. It's like, hey, gotta go, guys.
Nice.
No, we didn't really call the cops, but somebody would always end up. It always happened like around 10:30, 11, but we would make our money back. We'd make a few $100s on those house parties.
Nice.
So, but yeah, we used to use these over at Kinko's.
Yeah, it reminds me, I was in a hotel room with my wife and my son Felix when he was a baby. This was in Morro Bay. And we had the cops called on us because at about 1 or 2 a.m., Felix had this croup cough that he always gets. And the doctor says that, he needs cold air and that makes it go away. So I brought him to the balcony and he was like, and he was coughing. He was making a lot of noise. And they called the cops on us. And the hotel owner was like, what are you doing up there? I'm like, we tried to explain everything.
But the cops weren't buying it, huh?
Well, they let me go in a few days.
They thought you were going to throw your kid over the balcony.
They didn't know what it was. Like, he was making a lot of noise. So.
Yeah.
I had him wrapped in a blanket, sitting on the balcony, and the hotel owner was calling us. And...
Long story. All right, so we got the last Apple II. We have Steve Jobs resigned. So last Apple II was 86. This was 85 and 97. Any conspiracy theories, guys?
Well,
He knew he was gonna die in September.
No, I think this happens usually when companies become successful and they kind of taper off. Investment firms who put a lot of money into a company will be like, hey, we want to see a period of growth again. What do we need to change? Let's get a new CEO. That's what they always do. They did it with Dell. They try every company. You'll see, even if the CEO is a founder of the company, they'll eventually push him out, bring somebody that they like in the hopes of having better control of the company.
Interesting.
I suspect that's probably what happened here. But during Jobs' absence, like Apple kind of floundered. They weren't producing anything new.
Yeah.
They developed these really ugly. Do you remember those Apple computers? I forget the name of them. That had it was back when monitors like were really big.
The CRT.
And they had different colors. And they're like, look, you can get different color Macs.
The iMacs.
iMacs, yeah.
Yes.
And it seemed like a good idea at the time, but then people were like, no, this is taking up a lot of space.
Yeah.
And there's really nothing new here. It's the same old operating system. You guys haven't, meanwhile, Windows is going through the roof. They're
Yeah.
adding new features, new operating systems, new updates. Everyone's writing for Windows now.
Yep.
And so Apple was starting to tank. And at some point, they're like, well, we were doing good when Steve Jobs was the CEO. Let's bring him back.
Well, the thing is that when Steve Jobs was pushed out, he went and started this company called Next, N-E-X-T. And he actually had a real good thing going with this, and Apple saw it. And they're like, wait a second, our former CEO is now competing against us. So what they did is they just bought Next. And it turns out that I just read it right now. What was used, the technology that was used at Next was used to build the Mac OS operating system.
Interesting.
Now, are you familiar with Mac OS? What are its roots?
No, I just remember when they is it when it started from Linux?
It's actually based off of BSD.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's Berkeley Software Development. And so it's based off of BSD, but it's actually based off of what BSD is based off of, which is yet another technology operating system. And it's my understanding that it's not so much an operating system, but it's a framework of the operating system. And so that's what they're basing the OS X. They're basing it on that framework that BSD is based out of. So it is a Unix-like system.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's why they were able to run it on Pentium chips, and they were able to now turn around and compile it different to run on ARM chips, which is what their M1 processor is now running.
I remember too, Steve Jobs, shortly after they brought him back, he took an investment from Microsoft. Microsoft bought, like, I forget how many shares of Apple.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And they there was actually, you know those annual Apple meetings that they had. There was one
like
where
the conference, you mean?
What is it?
Like the conference, you mean?
Yeah, there was one where Steve Jobs was on the stage and said, we need to do things a little bit differently. Here's somebody who's going to invest in us. And then in a big monitor, they showed Bill Gates, and everyone was booing.
Oh, wow.
But Steve Jobs is saying, no, he's going to work with us, and we're going to help rebuild this company.
Interesting. Oh, that's when Bill Gates committed to porting Microsoft Office to Apple, to the OS X.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, we talked about that recently, right, Jonathan?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of cool. All right. What else do we got, Jonathan?
Next up, we have September 18th, Next Step OS released.
This is also, isn't this also from Next Computers?
Yeah.
Wow, look at that. That's beautiful.
I've never seen this operating system before.
Well, this is Next Step from Next OS, right? Next Computer. Yeah, releases 1.0 of Next Step. An object-oriented multitasking operating system originally designed to run on the Next brand's computer. It was later ported to other architectures such as Intel x86. It was considered ahead of its time. I mean, this thing, I like it. I would have totally.
It looks like a Windows manager on Unix.
Yeah,
It looks very similar to that.
like the X Windows manager.
Yeah, there was like X Windows. I forget what the name of it was. Man, this is.
Yeah, it was X. It was called X.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah, yeah. And I believe because he based this off of BSD, which was a Unix-like operating system. That's probably what he did. He probably took the X shell and made it beautiful. This is nice. I like this.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Can you imagine if they wouldn't have bought Next, what this would have been? This would have been the competitor. I wonder how well this would have done against Windows.
It's hard to say because Windows put down a lot of operating systems in its time. I don't know if you remember OS/2 Warp from the early 90s.
Yeah.
That looked like the next operating system of the time, but then Microsoft just put the cigar on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember installing it too. It had like 30 or 40 floppies, and you'd have to put one after the other after the other.
Well, Windows 95 was the same. It had floppies originally. It had like 25. But the thing was about OS/2 Warp was that it ran on the Windows 3 shell. So
it could, but it could also be the sole operating system, and you could actually run Windows 3 on OS/2 Warp because OS/2 Warp was the operating system and Windows 3 was a program.
correct.
But then I think what a lot of people realize is they installed OS/2 Warp on their computer and they're mostly ever running Windows.
Correct. Yeah. But I think it was the underlying operating system that was able to truly multitask instead of using like an interrupt system which is what Windows was doing. It was just interrupting the process of one to run another. So it would actually take it out of memory, put it into some kind of holding state, whether it be on the hard drive or switch channels on the memory, and then run another operating system. But with OS/2 Warp, it was a true multitasking operating system. It wasn't like you run one at a time and that's all you got. You know, it was truly multitasking, just like the next step OS, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I bet there's a lot of these operating systems that are in history now.
Yeah, definitely.
Had a lot of great potential, but
cool.
All right.
What else do we got, Jonathan?
Last one, September 19th. Turn that frown sideways.
Turn that frown sideways. Oh, this is the start of emojis.
Emoticons.
wow, 1982.
That's when they started? Carnegie Mellon Bulletin Board. Professor Scott Fahlman proposes the first known use of emoticons. So you either had a happy face or a sad face.
That's all they had.
Did they actually make it into an image, or did they is this just a standard for 3 characters?
Yeah, so this was 82, so it was just a colon, the dash, and the close parenthesis or the open parenthesis. Close parenthesis for a happy face, open parenthesis for the sad face.
Wow. I've never seen these in use up until people started sending emails.
Or text.
Or texts, yeah. Mainly a lot in text, but emails didn't really take off until like the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
And then you had all these proprietary emails like Yahoo will let you put its own emoticons, MSN, AOL had their own ones.
I feel that all text systems now have a minimum standard of images to show happy face, sad face, teared face, sweaty face, freezing face. I feel
there's a company that regulates that, an organization.
Oh, really?
I don't know what it's called, but they recognize they they regulate the different emotions, like the standard ones. They also came up with a while back. They said that there had to be like different skin colors on the emoticons. I'm not sure what other influences they had on it.
Organization behind the emojis growth. With emojis more popular than ever, the Unicode Consortium. Is that the company you're talking about? The Unicode Consortium.
I don't know. I know it was they regulated like a set of default emotions that should be available. They said something like they wanted to see ones with different skin colors and make them more diverse. It was more about the culture of the emojis rather than anything technical.
Interesting.
Cool.
So that was the start of it right there.
Yeah.
1982, who would have thought?
Who would have thunk it, huh?
It's so amazing to think, like, seriously, what were we doing in 1982?
1982, I was pop locking and breaking on the corner of some street in Cypress Park, located in California.
1982, I was 6. I was playing with the Timex Sinclair 1000.
You were not 6 in 1982.
Yeah, I was. In fact, 10 days later was my birthday. So I was 5 when the smiley emoji came out.
Wow, I was let's see. I was 13 years old. Yeah, I was pop locking and breaking on the corner. We had those big old radios, you know, that with the big speakers and stuff, and you put cassette tapes in there. And
Yes, I had one of those.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. Now, before those were called boom boxes, that's a later term.
That's right.
This was in Detroit. Ours was called a ghetto blaster. Is that a legitimate name?
That's a legitimate name.
Okay, I thought that was just something we called it in Detroit.
No,
Ghetto blaster.
We call them here too, ghetto blasters.
That is awesome.
I think you guys had one in your room, didn't you, Jonathan?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, I ended up buying one just because of the retro aspect of it. It reminded me back in my days of being 13 years old and stuff. So, but yeah.
Ghetto blaster.
We'll end it at that. Cool. I think that was it, right, Jonathan? Awesome. Well, until next time. Thanks for joining us, Sam.
Hey, no problem. That was a lot of fun.
Cool. Peace out.